The greatest player on the field between the two teams, UCLA and Coastal Carolina, is wearing a Coastal Carolina uniform, which is why this game will be extremely close by the time it's over. We'll talk more about it on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, download, subscribe, tell me your thoughts, predictions for this one, and become an everydayer. Because if you're an everydayer, you will listen to basketball content, what the teams are doing across the country, and football content coming into this wild 3-quarterback weekend for UCLA as week one is upon us as the Bruins take on Coastal Carolina. And while you might not be able to watch the game depending on what TV carrier you have, we'll talk about it, we'll dissect it. Maybe you listen, maybe you go and see me there, whatever it is, come say hi and say what's up. The Bruins, hey, we'll see how it goes. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase if you want to get some last-second tickets. The Bruins, well, it will be a unique game, to say the least, against Coastal Carolina, right? What's the fan attendance going to be like? What's the game atmosphere going to be like? Quarterbacks, offense, defense, what is it all going to look like against an opponent that I think many people are taking lightly in Coastal Carolina? Just because Tim Beck is a first-time collegiate head coach, just because their defense might not be as good, does not mean this game won't be close. South Alabama last year, another Sun Belt team, came and gave the Bruins all their worth in week 3, and the Bruins had to narrowly escape by a last-second field goal to beat the Jaguars last year. And I think that this Coastal Carolina team is better or more dynamic, which makes them a scary play in week 1. So let's get to our predictions and keys. As I said in the teaser, the best player on this field is Grayson McCall, right? The best player coming on this field on either side is wearing a Coastal Carolina uniform. Now, while the talent can be different from players 2 through however you want to rank every single player in uniform from 1 to the walk-ons, everybody in this game, the best player in the field is Grayson McCall. 3-time preseason player of the year in his own conference, 3-time conference player of the year. The numbers speak for themselves. 70% completion percentage, 78 passing touchdowns, only 8 interceptions, 8,000 passing yards, and should probably, by the time the season is done, if he stays healthy for a majority of the season, hopefully, then he'll pass over 10,000 yards, if not 11,000, by the time the season's done. 17 rushing touchdowns, 1,000 rushing yards. The dude does it all, right? Some absurdly good passing numbers without turning it over. Hasn't necessarily been able to play a full, complete season in either the last 2 years, but here he is with an opportunity to lead his team, a new head coach, to a big upset. And the Bruins, while they do have the Bruins have some returners on defense, right? They've got the new defensive coordinator, the new energy, the new buzz, the lively Chip Kelly, as Ben Bolch has been putting it in the LA Times article that he wrote about, where Chip's just feeling good about himself. This is a very dangerous game because the best player, and while there's different X factors in this game, McCall is the unit, literally the unit that has to be stopped. He's going to drive this Chanticleer team into the Rose Bowl with a full steam ahead attitude, with some very good weapons on the outside, some underrated running backs, and a team that is going to put up points. I don't think the Bruins will completely shut down this Coastal Carolina team. I would be completely shocked if UCLA shuts down Coastal Carolina in week 1. That's just pure honesty. Now, if they do that, I'll be surprised. It depends, right? It's one thing to slow down an opposition, which is honestly what the key for most defenses is, versus shut down. The Bruins might be able to slow them down on a couple of key possessions and might be able to pull away late, but to shut down McCall and all of his other weapons, his preseason selections in the Sun Belt for his receivers, I just don't believe that's going to be the case, which is why UCLA should make sure to try and contain defensively one of our first keys in McCall in the running game. McCall in his first year as a starter in 2020 was averaging about 5 yards a carry, had about nearly 500 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns rushing, when Coastal Carolina had that good year, went 11-1 in 2020, upset BYU, had nearly an undefeated season, if not for an overtime loss, heartbreakingly, against the then-ranked Liberty Flames. So in the beginning, McCall was running a lot, and that was under Jamie Chadwell, who is now at Liberty, ironically enough. In 2021, they went 11-2. He rushed a little less. And then last year, while he did miss some games, have to deal with some injuries, he also rushed for a lot less than he had. He's dealt with a foot injury and did have a head injury in the bowl game and had a lot more rushing touchdowns. But the overall rushing yardage wasn't there, seeing how his rush per carry has actually gone down. Yards per carry went down over the last couple of years. And of course, that's different with tackles for loss and all those different stats that are a little different college-wise as opposed to the NFL. But still, those numbers have gone down. And now he's under a different offensive mindset with the coaching change. So how can UCLA slow down the Coastal Carolina offense? Most importantly, the outsides have to keep contained. If Grayson McCall is running all around like a madman, then the Bruins are going to have a long night at the Rose Bowl. Even if Tim Beck, the first-year head coach, who coached at NC State, had some really good success a couple of seasons ago with Devin Leary, that name might ring familiar. I talked about him about being a potential UCLA quarterback if they wanted to look at someone in the transfer portal, like a McCall, like a Leary. Leary, who had one of the best seasons, arguably, as an NC State quarterback in 21, his offensive coordinator was Tim Beck. 3,000 yards, like 35 touchdowns, breaking the Phillip Rivers single-season record. And if it wasn't for injuries, he probably would have had a great campaign or equally as successful campaign in 2022 if he didn't suffer an early season or earlier in-season ending injury. That was for Leary a couple years ago. And there's been some comparisons by Beck about, hey, what can I do with McCall, who is an even better runner? He views Leary's arm better. And McCall is someone who could put some pinpoint passes deep down the field with some good, talented receivers and run the football. That just seems like Beck's dream. So the Bruins, most importantly, have to contain. If the rushing yardage is getting up, if they're piling, if Coastal Carolina is chewing up some clock and just continuing to get first down after first down, what are these, linebackers? Second, what's the DBs going to do? Well, they had to shift some guys around, a freshman, you've got a senior in Churchwell starting. Can the linebacking depth play a role this season for Ken Norton Jr.? I'm not entirely sure, but that's what the Bruins need to do. Contain on the outside. Don't let Coastal Carolina's Grayson McCall run around like a Jaden Delora did last year, right? Like a Caleb Williams. Unable to bring him back down in the backfield, and the Bruins suffered for it when they couldn't get key stops late in games or throughout the entirety of the game in some aspects in recent upsets and losses at the Rose Bowl with the dual threat quarterback like Grayson McCall is. Now for Coastal Carolina's defense, they're amongst one of the worst in the Sun Belt. They averaged giving up nearly 32 points per game, one of the worst, about 13th in the Sun Belt last year, right? This is a team that already is losing 4 key guys, 2 starting DBs or 2 key defensive backs, another key nose tackle, and their single season record holder for sacks who transferred to Michigan as an edge rusher. So while the Bruins are bringing back the Latus, the Murphy twins, Muwasau, even bringing in some talent in the transfers, Coastal Carolina, while they bring a lot of offensive weapons back, despite some maybe new schemes, defensively, they're not going to be good. I just don't think beyond UCLA coughing up the football and mistakes from new quarterbacks between Garbers, between Moore, Schlee, however the rotation is going to go consistently based on play count for the whole game, for the half, for the quarter. This is a Coastal Carolina team that has some depth in the linebackers from what I've read. JT Killen is someone who is going to lead that linebacking depth, so maybe they can keep the plays in front of them for the most part. But there's a lot of holes potentially in the secondary, in up front. They have lost a lot of talent for a defense that gave up a lot of points, 40-plus points to Troy in their conference championship game. So while Coastal Carolina is going to be able to score and score and score, I do think UCLA should, this is going to be a little crazy now, if you bear with me, UCLA should only punt, despite having a rotation of sorts of 3 quarterbacks, 2 times or less this whole game. And I was going to get so crazy and say, if they punt once, I'd be frustrated. Now, that's a lot to ask for a second career start for Garbers, a first career appearance for Moore and a first career appearance for Slee in a UCLA uniform. But I'm saying if the Bruins can keep it to 2 or fewer punts, then the Bruins are easily taking advantage of a defense. I know year to year is not always the same thing, but that's what Beck is having to overhaul defensively. And he's already an offensive guy. How does he bring in different guys, different coaches to overhaul a team that's already losing a majority of its talent and at multiple spots and up front and in the secondary? I think the Bruins, especially with the receiving weapons, you can go from J. Michael Sturdivant to Ford to even a couple of tight ends to Mokiao Atimalala. There's guys I'm leaving off that list accidentally, on purpose, whatever it means, who can blow past this secondary, I think, in an instant, whether it be a short crossing pattern for a 75-yard touchdown, whether it's the first play action, and they hit a deep bomb to J. Michael Sturdivant, who rips it over the DB's head and goes for 70 yards for a touchdown on the first play. I don't know. I'm not sure if they're going to go Utah versus Florida, right? But I do think the Bruins should be able to score and march down the field consistently throughout this game, over and over and over again. 2 or fewer punts should be the goal, if not 1 or fewer. And if the Bruins can punt it only a couple of times or 1 or fewer throughout the whole game, what does that say about the Chip Kelly offense? That regardless of who's in at quarterback, if they're running the ball, whoever's touching it, that they're just going to dominate what's in front of them, that is huge. But reminder, this is not the best defense. Coastal Carolina's hat is hung on their offense. Which brings me, in terms of punting the ball, to special teams, our third and final key for this game. Because if we all remember, if you did or didn't watch that game against Bowling Green last year, week 1, the Bruins, with a lot of guys coming back, right? You had the Charbonnet, you had the DTRs, and while Bobo is the transfer, a lot of guys truly knew what their role was going to be. Maybe not defensively, but offensively, they knew what they were going to do. Instead, UCLA, a little quick 3-and-out, a block punt return for a touchdown, a muff punt, a pick, and the Bruins were down 17-7 against what looked to be a slightly inept Bowling Green team who lost to an FCS team who really couldn't do much offensively, had a sneaky decent defense at times, but the Bruins coughed it up in special teams, which is why I'm saying UCLA has to avoid special teams disasters. They've got a new punter. They've got a new kicker. Those are new roles, right? They don't have Kaz Allen to return kickoffs anymore. So they're going to have to rotate new guys. And last year, the Bruins had to rotate quite a few bodies in to return punts. Any number of a missed field goal, messed up kickoff returns, because McDoom, the Coastal Carolina kickoff return man, is very dangerous. He can average about 25 yards per return, a little under that in 2022 when he was a freshman. That's someone who can break it off and change the game in an instant. Or after a big UCLA touchdown, get Coastal Carolina back in it with a big run. If the Bruins cough up the football, obviously turnovers have been the bugaboo when UCLA's lost under Chip Kelly. It's a wide margin. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's ridiculous in terms of the plus minus UCLA wins versus losses when it comes to winning and losing the turnover battle. When they cough it up, it's almost instantaneous that the Bruins do not win, or they get so far behind that they play catch up and they end up losing when they face a dual threat quarterback, hence Grayson McCall. So got to make sure you contain McCall on the outside. If he's running wildly, you can't bring him down. It's going to suck for the UCLA defense. If UCLA can't go and have 2 or fewer punts, regardless of who's at quarterback against, I think, what will be a very porous Coastal Carolina defense, then I'm sorry, that's going to be a glaring eyesore for me watching that game, understanding they should have very talented pieces on the outside. They should run against the bad defense. I think all these quarterbacks should be able to succeed. It is what it is. And then avoid the mistake on special teams, because that will allow Coastal Carolina to get that upper edge in a certain moment when maybe UCLA could have pulled away, could have won, whatever it is. It's make sure you don't have a special teams disaster. More specifically to the turnovers, special teams disasters, like a return for a touchdown, missed field goal, muff kick, all those things all happened in week 1, or for the most part, against Bowling Green. And the Bruins still won that game by 4 touchdowns, going away in the melting hot sun. So those are important. My prediction for this game, I think this game will be very close. I think it'll be somewhat similar a little bit to the South Alabama game. And while I don't think maybe Coastal Carolina will be in control the whole game, it'll be close. These two teams can score. And my final score I have it is 42-21 35, UCLA winning. Whether it's a late cover there of sorts by Coastal Carolina, I know there's different ideas as to, is it a 2-score game, all those things. I think the Bruins actually win this one within a 1-score game. Is it one of those games the Bruins pull away, they dominate, and the score is closer? I'm not entirely sure. I believe UCLA will win a close one. It'll be scary for a large portion of the game, and the Bruins are going to have to come to play. Because if they don't, Tim Beck, while this is a lot to ask of him to go on the road across the country as a first-time D1 collegiate football head coach to pull this off, they will be ready to play. I just think Chip Kelly, with his ease, there's something about the repeated talk about depth for this UCLA team that can be tested and put to the test even as soon as week 1. Because then they go to San Diego State, and then they play NC Central, and hopefully the Bruins will be 3-0 before they take on Utah, who can hopefully knock off Baylor and give the Pac-12, whatever is left of the Pac-12, some hope, right? Some love and hope. So I think the Bruins win 42-35. At this point, I could even predict what the quarterback situation is going to be like. I'm not even going to go that far. I do think they will all have some sort of success and make an impact in this game, and we'll just see how it plays out. UCLA 42-35, contain the outside, 2 or fewer punts, and limit the special teams disasters. And UCLA should be in for a long day of success offensively and hopefully slowing down what will be a very dynamic Coastal Carolina offense. That's all you can ask as the Bruins go to week 1, and we'll talk about that. We will react to it, as always, on Locked On UCLA, so stay tuned for that reaction episode post-game against Coastal Carolina, whether it's a short minute-long thing, 8 minutes, whatever we feel like. I will talk about it and go more in depth on the following Monday. Now, coming up next on the Locked On UCLA podcast, what is to make of this crazy conference realignment, right? Cal and Stanford to the ACC. I know this is Locked On UCLA, but we got to talk about it, right? The Pac-12 is literally evaporating. It's gone. It's dead. If it wasn't dead, if it wasn't already dead, I don't know what is. But what does this mean about the quote-unquote, right? I forget who was making the jokes. Maybe it was the Bruin Report Online guys, whoever it was, maybe Ben Bolch. I forget who to give the credit to. The calimony, right? The Bruins have to pay. What does that mean with these schools going to the ACC? Is it even smart? Who knows? We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. If you still haven't gotten your tickets to go to the UCLA game against Coastal Carolina or any of their games in 2023, they're pretty cheap. And I remember I looked up earlier in the week on Gametime that they're about $13, right? $15. You can go to Gametime right now, download the Gametime app, because buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. And it's an easy way to buy tickets, sports, music, comedy, theater, all near us in Southern California. Killer deals on last-minute tickets, which is what you're going to be doing if you haven't gotten your UCLA tickets in the Rose Bowl. You should join myself, family, everybody. All the Bruin Nation needs to be there. So go to Gametime. Flash deals, last-minute tickets, the best place to go. You can get images of seat views all around the Rose Bowl and the lowest price guarantee with event cancellation protection, everything. Check it out, because it's the place for last-minute ticket deals. All you have to do is snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account. Redeemable code is LOCKEDONCollege, one word, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I'll see you there Saturday night. Let's do it. Second segment of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. What to make of this conference realignment craziness, right? Before our very eyes, it looked like, UCLA, SC are going to be going to the Big Ten. That was the big story. When's the Pac-12 going to add another school? When are they going to add San Diego State? Maybe it's Tulane. Maybe it's SMU. Maybe they poach the Big 12. Maybe it's Fresno State. I don't know. There are so many different ideas thrown out by Spencer McLaughlin of the Locked On Pac-12 podcast, which soon enough, ironically, might not even exist if there's no Pac-12 conference. The Conference of Champions, and now there's nothing left because UCLA with a lot of championships, Stanford, all these schools have now, for the most part, found other homes other than Washington State and Oregon State. And while off the top of my head, I'm not really going to speculate any idea where the Oregon States or the likes of the Washington States are going to go. Stanford and Cal going to the ACC, right? There's the idea now that the ACC has 18 teams, the SEC has 16, the Big Ten has 16, the Big 12, I forget how many schools they have now. All these schools with numbers don't even have the right numbers. So what are we going to do? Why is it now it's just a complete joke to where the super conference era is here. And what's funny is arguably the biggest quotables have come from both UCLA coaches Mick Cronin and Chip Kelly. Kelly had more of the football solution in terms of, we've already talked about this. This is a few weeks old. Even Ben Bolch retweeted it out. Chip Kelly said, why don't we have 64 teams, power conferences, have a championship, football-only conferences. Group of 5 have their own championship, 64 teams. Then FCS, yada, yada, yada. And that doesn't affect any other sport because only football travels once a week. They get chartered flights. They go fly. You get a lot of football. Maybe you play some other teams, but it's only football, and that's how you affect it. Everybody gets a championship. No other sports are affected. Mick Cronin has been quoted, even before the Spain trip, as saying, this is not in the benefit of the student athlete. And clearly, how are Stanford and Cal having to go across the country, all the ACC schools flying to the Bay Area schools, when you could have a lot less travel going from UCLA to Stanford to Cal and then SC and all the other western part of the United States for UCLA. Travel is going to be an interesting one. So Mick Cronin talked about how the bills have gotten too much, and now with TV, practicality has gone thrown out the window, and all we care about is the money and the TV deals, and the athletic departments, mostly operating on deficits as opposed to making money, need to get the bill to pay the universities who normally shovel money over and say, hey, this is how we're going to cover the deficits, even when most universities don't want to. I've seen it firsthand, not firsthand necessarily, but having dealt with athletic departments, hearing Mick Cronin kind of say most of those things, not trying to misquote him there, but basically the big thing is the bill's gotten too high and now something's got to pay. And it's affecting all these other schools, like the baseball teams who are going to have to play all across the country for various things in ridiculous schedules in a revamped conference. What does this mean for the small schools? All right. It's just going to be a crazy time for college football. We just expanded the college football playoff, ironically, to be able to include the group of 5, to include the Pac-12 and the Big 12 schools for the most part, right? For the schools that couldn't get in. I know TCU made it to the final, but all the other conferences that were getting pushed out, we expanded it to the 12-team playoff, and now it's just going to be 12 teams from 3 conferences, right? March Madness, they're going to try and expand it probably to 100 bazillion teams. So every team can get in, and all the Cinderellas knock each other out before they play to tiers of super blue bloods, mini blue bloods, everything going into the future. Now that I've ranted, let's breathe in. Remember all the flack the UC Regents gave to UCLA for leaving. They were trying to stop this. It was a whole long saga that lasted into December before the Bruins were able to clearly battle the powers that be, UCLA as a whole, as a UC school, leaving because that left Cal in the dust by themselves. Because Stanford's their own thing, SC's their own thing. It was really a thing about UCLA and Berkeley, and what is Cal going to lose with the Bruins going? Stanford probably could have survived as an independent, but now that Cal's going to the ACC, they're going to the ACC along with SMU and creating an uber super conference of super conferences, which will be fun when Duke comes to the West Coast and plays basketball games as soon as the next year or two, right? It'll be coming a lot sooner than we realize. But the Bruins were going to have to pay this calamony, right? They're going to have to pay this tax of $1 million, $2 million, whatever. I forget the number was. They were going to have to pay a little bit of money of the chump change the Bruins were going to get from this big media deal that got negotiated after UCLA and SC joined the conference. And they were going to have to pay Cal a little bit of chump change just to keep them standing, right? A little bit of money, which is kind of embarrassing for both. And Cal already has a bit of a deficit, more than UCLA, despite having more student athletes. They've struggled even more than UCLA has financially. But when now UCLA has a full share of the Big Ten, Washington and Oregon, they get a lesser share. Stanford and Cal apparently are only getting, 30% of the share the first 7 years. before it jumps up not even to a full share by year 8. And by the 10th year, Cal and Stanford, which is, I wonder how much money they're getting. You already have Florida State barking about all the money that they're not getting because they're a brand name. They want to lead the ACC, probably to the SEC, because they don't like the financial distribution. They were voting against the addition of these schools. It was NC State who flipped to allow the Stanford and the Cal and the SMUs to come join the conference. How is that going to help these schools getting 30% of the media deal financial revenue just to remain relevant of sorts, in addition to the additional travel? You've got all the four corner schools to the Big 12, which I guess graphically can make sense, but it's going to suck. But Cal and Stanford to the ACC, UCLA SC to the Big 10, even Washington and Oregon, which I'm now forgetting, right? All the craziness, the reschedules after the Big 10 released the schedule, only to reflip it. Now the Pac-12 is just dead. It is not even breathing. There's nothing left. There's not even a pulse for this Conference of Champions, which we'll get to hear. I believe Bill Walton say it one last time. Maybe he won't even say it. Maybe he'll just, out of straight refusal, not even say it again. What about all these? It's just a crazy time. So how does UCLA even have to pay this tax anymore? Is the UC Regents going to put up as much of a fight, or did they push for Cal to say, hey, UCLA did it, you can go across and go be a part of this conference realignment, which might even be more ridiculous than UCLA's crazy cross-country road trip to Rutgers and everything in between, right? From Seattle to Rutgers, you've got some crazy Big Ten conference. Cal and Stanford, why don't you go to the ACC? Just funny how there's much less pushback unless they give a fight later after the ACC just voted to let them in. Well, I wonder, one, does UCLA's tax get lessened? Will there be any pushback from the UC Regents? Or has this all been cleared and it's gonna get swept under the rug? The Bruins still have to pay it, and there will be no blowback from the Regents. I just wonder how that's going to be interesting, right? Considering everything that's been going on. Or maybe the Regents are like, this is so nuts, we're not even going to bother. This is just straight anarchy. We've just given up, which is possibly where they could be at, which is where I'm at, which it'll be entertaining to see UCLA in the Big Ten. But college athletics has been crazy. Even Mick Cronin said we haven't seen the end of it. Maybe it swings so far one way that it swings back to where at some point, all these schools are going to have to schedule each other so you don't travel as much during the non-conference. And then during conference play, you're going to go all across the country, which is reverse, right? In the non-conference, generally, you go on a further road trip only to play your local schools throughout the conference schedule. Maybe they'll flip it to where the non-conference schedules are the local schools, and then the conference schedule is built of much further travel against different opponents, bigger names, smaller schools, whatever it is, on who gets added to these conferences. And realignment probably still isn't done because Oregon State and Washington State now need a home. The Fighting Two of the Pac-12, the Conference of Cougars and Beavers. And I don't know where they're going to go. What a crazy time in college athletics. In the last just year and a couple months, right? From, what was it, June, July? I forget the day. And now here we are. The dropping of this podcast and the Pac-12 is just gone. They went from they could add teams and they'll make less money to now they are just gone. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. That's all I got to say. Wow. Stunning. We're going to wrap up this podcast with some UCLA basketball because why not? And I'm going to focus on Devin Williams and what his production was. Someone who's going to have to fight for some playing time this year as a true freshman, needing to put on some muscle. How did he use his time without all the big men available in Spain to a positive? I think there were definitely some positives for Devin Williams as we look at that coming up next on the Locked On UCLA podcast. All right, final segment of Locked On UCLA podcast. Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer with you guys. If you're going to the UCLA Coastal Carolina game, I will most likely be wearing an oversized white UCLA jersey. Will I be wearing a hat? Haven't decided that yet. I'll be caked in sunscreen from the daytime barbecue tailgating experience at the Rose Bowl, which I think is actually one of the best in the country. especially if there's more people there. If there's nobody there, then it's not really a tailgating experience. But if you want to say hi, if you're so inclined, and you're like, oh, there's that dude who just spouts random nonsense, come say hi. I'll be hanging with the pops and the good old friends. And I don't know where I'll be, but if for some reason you recognize me, sometimes I can go incognito unexpectedly, but here I am. Just come say hi. In the meantime, what is the final topic? We're talking Devin Williams and what he did in the 3 games in Spain against the Madrid All-Stars, against Valencia Basket, and Girona, who blew out UCLA in a game we don't actually have the full final box score because it's not allowed to be public for the closed-door scrimmage. Kind of like that UCLA-San Diego State thing, except we know the final score. So Devin Williams, the 6'11 product out of Corona Centennial, is behind Kenneth Nuba, Burke, Bona, Mara. Those are 4 big men right there that Devin Williams is going to have to compete with just to fight for time on the floor. And while maybe Burke might not necessarily be the full reason Devin Williams is stuck in the back, Cronin's already giving him a lot of praise, a lot of love for his ability to be agile, just do things that he can't simply teach. He's excited for Devin Williams' growth in the future. There's just not a lot of ability in terms of how Mara plays, unless Mara turns out to be a bust, for Williams to play this year. He's one of those guys that needs to grow year 1 to year 2, strength, ability, confidence on the court. And that's hopefully what he got in Spain to maybe make him an important X factor off the bench at times, depending on if someone, dare I say, gets injured or something sweeps the UCLA team and Williams is pressed into action just like Nuba was last year in the Sweet 16 against Gonzaga, which we hope it's not. But here's what Williams put in. In that first game, 14 points, 7 rebounds in 17 minutes. So close to a double-double, 5 offensive rebounds. In the next game, he had only a couple points, but 6 rebounds in 14 minutes, a couple of blocks, 4 offensive rebounds. And then in the most minutes he's played, 20 minutes, 6 points, 2 rebounds against the best, most athletic, most professional group of grown men the Bruins have played this Spain trip. 6 points, 2 rebounds. Didn't really fully, I think it says 6.7 rebounds that I wrote. Didn't differentiate between whether they're offensive rebounds or not. But he got more and more playing time as the summer went on, with the Bruins being even more depleted. No Jan Vide, and there's no Bona, no Burke, no Mara. So here you have Williams, who got some time, showcased the athleticism, finishing at the rim. We don't necessarily get to see the full picture because we didn't all obviously get to see Williams play with the lack of a stream, the lack of even knowing what the final score was for the most part against Girona, if I'm even saying that right. I think Williams, with the ability for him to hit the offensive glass as hard as he did those first couple of games, very impressive, which makes me think there's going to be a key moment in the game this year where he's going to be playing. Maybe it's a Pac-12 game. Maybe it's one of those early games in some tournament or some non-conference game that he gets pushed into action. Foul trouble, maybe some eligibility. Who knows what craziness is bound to happen in this day and age of conference realignment, NIL, and everything in between. Cronin's going to put out the freshman and say, go get him, big boy. It's your turn to shine in your little 5-minute stint here. And the Bruins might be struggling. They might not be able to get some buckets. While Williams will sit there, I think he might get a key offensive rebound or 2, a putback, that keys a big run at some point for a victory. It might not be the most important game of the season. It might be one of those games the Bruins should be winning by a lot of points against the lower tier team in conference or out of conference. But it's maybe his offensive rebounding ability that he showcased early, his athleticism, a key block, turn into an offensive rebound. As we saw the Adem Bona hustle would key into victory last year, I think Williams might do something similar. Obviously not on a Pac-12 freshman of the year like level, but in 1 or 2 games, I think Williams can have that impact that shifts a game for someone whose role probably is not going to be that big this season, at least heading into it. Burke looks like he's got a complete opportunity to start. Obviously, a Daimara with the excitement. Bona, when he's healthy, will be starting. And then you forget the 6 years, the super senior, right? However many years Nuba's been there. He's got to clamp on playing time. The leader is going to fight. If he played almost the entire game against Drew Timme and the Zags, he is going to get some playing time, especially with a much bigger, stronger body than Devin Williams, who, if he can somehow put on some weight and muscle between now and the start of the season or now and the end of the season, we could see a big transformation. But that's why he needs a full year, and we'll see how he goes. If he stays in the UCLA program, develops, could be a star in the future, while the internationals and the other freshmen might star now. It could be Devin Williams, the star of the future. Some positive things. I think an offensive rebound will key a big rally, a big surge in a game if the Bruins win, and hopefully he keeps his spirits up, because his time might not be now. It might be in a game, but it might be in the future. So I think the future is bright for Devin Williams. Just a little mini spotlight there as we try to spotlight the players and what they did during the trip. In the meantime, that's going to do it for Locked On UCLA. Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer saying so long, become an everydayer of the Locked On UCLA podcast, because, hey, we're going to react post-Coastal Carolina game like we do and talk about everything in between. So hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. Let's go. College football season's here. Let's get excited. As I said, 42-35 UCLA Bruins. Hopefully they win 59-0. Whatever it is, we'll have fun, and all the quarterbacks can throw for 7 touchdowns. I don't know. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.